Every episode, Hyacinth Bucket reminded us that appearances are everything. But what if hers were built on lies? Her china wasn't Royal Doulton. Her royal connections. Almost real, until Buckingham Palace said absolutely not. Keeping up appearances was a battlefield of mistakes and lies that somehow created one of Britain's greatest sitcoms. Get ready. These 20 weird facts will shatter everything you thought you knew about Hyacinth and her perfectly polished world. Fact 1. The New Zealand hat that became British comedy royalty. You won't believe this, but one of Britain's most iconic sitcom props didn't come from England at all. It came from a construction site halfway around the world. When audiences first met Onslow, the lovable slob forever lounging in his vest and beer-stained jeans, that faded blue baseball cap with the letters FH seemed like a random touch, but it wasn't. Those two letters stand for Fulton Hogan, a road construction company in New Zealand. Geoffrey Hughes, the actor behind Onslow, stumbled upon it by accident. During a theater tour in New Zealand, he chatted with a truck driver from Fulton Hogan who offered him the cap as a souvenir. Hughes took it home, wore it during rehearsals, and everyone on set instantly agreed. It was perfect. It told you everything about Onslow without a word. Working-class pride, total comfort, and zero concern about appearances. When the show exploded in popularity, fans started hunting for the same cap. Fulton Hogan suddenly found their logo being printed on replica hats across the UK. Even decades later, collectors still trade original FH caps online. Fact 2. The Royal Doulton scandal that made Hyacinth's tea. Said a lie, Hyacinth Bucket built her entire identity around her china. Royal Doulton with the hand-painted periwinkles, she would purr, as if each cup were blessed by the Queen herself. But brace yourself, it was all a fraud. That porcelain wasn't Royal Doulton at all. It was Braganza, a modest, mass-produced pattern from coal-cloth china, sold in regular department stores for the middle class. The production team renamed it Periwinkle, simply because it sounded fancier on camera. The real Royal Doulton Company later confirmed the truth. Such a pattern never existed. So every time Hyacinth flaunted her china, she was unknowingly showing off a budget brand. Ironically, the ultimate social climber serving tea in imitation porcelain. Collectors eventually began hunting the same pattern after the show aired, driving up prices for what was once everyday tableware. You could buy a set for £20 in 1990. Today, the Hyacinth china can reach hundreds online. And this is perhaps the most British comedy twist of them all. The lie became the legend. Fact 3. The day Patricia Routledge publicly destroyed her own prequel. When BBC announced Young Hyacinth in 2016, fans expected nostalgia and laughter. What they didn't expect was Patricia Routledge, the original Hyacinth herself, to turn on it like a thunderstorm. At 87, she didn't mince words. When a reporter asked what she thought of the prequel, she replied sharply, "Why are they doing this sort of thing?" They must be desperate. That single sentence sent shockwaves through the British press. Routledge wasn't being petty. She was fiercely protective of what keeping up appearances represented. She went further, saying she'd switch off the TV rather than watch new remakes. For her, the golden age of sitcoms had already passed, and she wasn't about to let anyone cheapen it. Meanwhile, actress Carrie Howard, who played the young Hyacinth, admitted she was crushed. She'd grown up idolizing Routledge and hoped for her blessing. But the silence from the legend never broke. Writer Roy Clark tried to diffuse the tension by joking, "That's pure Hyacinth," implying Routledge's criticism was exactly what her character would say. Still, fans were stunned. It wasn't a scandal. It was art, imitating life. Fact 4. The Cold War behind the laughter. You'd never guess that behind all those teacups and perfect manners, keeping up appearances was fueled by pure creative warfare. Roy Clark, the man who wrote every single episode, refused to step foot on set. He'd send in his scripts from his quiet little office in Yorkshire and vanish like a ghost. Meanwhile, Harold Snowd, the director, had to film what Clark imagined, except Clark's imagination didn't care about physics, budget, or logic. He'd write scenes where cars appeared inside living rooms, or Hyacinth hosted dinner parties with 50 extras in a space built for 5. Snowd would fix it quietly, trimming lines, reworking jokes, and keeping production alive. But when Clark found out, he'd lose it. BBC executives eventually hired a translator, someone whose only job was to tell each man what the other one really meant. And the tension worked. Their Cold War gave birth to some of the sharpest dialogue and tightest comic timing ever seen on British TV. Two men who couldn't stand each other accidentally created harmony through conflict. Fact 5. The cardigan that outsmarted every costume designer. It started as a throwaway choice, something pulled off a dusty hanger in a BBC basement. Judy Cornwell, the actress who played Daisy, was wandering through racks of forgotten clothes when she spotted it. A gray cardigan, stretched at the sleeves, soft at the edges, the kind of thing your aunt wears when the heating breaks. She tried it on, looked in the mirror, and said quietly, "That's Daisy." The wardrobe team laughed at first. Too plain, too old, not television ready. But Cornwell insisted. She understood Daisy better than anyone. This cardigan wasn't fashion, it was a life story. The faded fabric spoke of washing lines, cheap tea, and quiet endurance. On camera, it became magic. Whenever Daisy appeared, audiences felt warmth. They saw themselves, their mothers, their neighbors. Years later, fans mailed letters begging to know where they could buy the Daisy sweater. The BBC had to admit it wasn't for sale. It was a one-off survivor from some forgotten drama. That cardigan now sits in the BBC archives, treated like treasure. Fact 6. The spin-off that the BBC tried to erase. Here's something the BBC never wanted you to know. Keeping Up Appearances almost got a spin-off, and it sounded insane. Roy Clark came up with a show called Mind Your Manners. The idea flipped the world upside down. Onslow, Daisy, and Rose would move into a crumbling English manor after the lord of the house died. Suddenly, the laziest man in Britain would be living among chandeliers and silver cutlery. The plot was hilarious. Onslow accidentally running the estate, Daisy confusing wine for cooking vinegar, Rose flirting with the air while he's supposed to be in mourning. BBC insiders loved it. They scouted locations, drafted scripts, even considered Sue Pollard as the eccentric cook. But something went wrong. Funding vanished, meetings stopped, and within months, Mind Your Manners disappeared like it never existed. Rumor says the BBC got cold feet. The idea of a working-class family mocking the aristocracy in their own castle? Too risky in the 90s. Some documents still sit locked in archives, stamped unproduced. Fans call it the Lost Series. Fact 7. The day Hyacinth nearly met a real prince. It sounds like the ultimate British fantasy. Hyacinth Bucket sharing afternoon tea with an actual royal. But that fantasy almost became reality. During the planning of the Christmas special Sea Fever, the BBC had an outrageous idea. Invite Prince Edward, the youngest son of Queen Elizabeth II, to appear in the Queen Elizabeth II. Producers sent the formal invitation, imagining Hyacinth fainting at the thought of mixing with her kind of people. It would have been the scene of a lifetime. The Queen didn't forbid it, but palace advisors quietly suggested it might not be appropriate. What did it mean? They didn't want a real Windsor caught in Hyacinth's chaos. When the rejection came, the cast couldn't stop laughing. Even without royal approval, Sea Fever went ahead. Champagne, seasickness, and all. Yet it's hard not to wonder what could have been. The BBC was that confident in the show's popularity that they approached the royal family. Hyacinth didn't get her crown moment, but she came dangerously close. And if you think about it, maybe the royals dodged a bullet. Fact 8. The actress who refused to play silly. There's a story Patricia Routledge once told about the day she refused to perform a scene. The script called for Hyacinth to slip, fall, and land in a garden fountain. Everyone laughed at the rehearsal table except her. She stared at the page, then calmly said, "Hyacinth doesn't fall. Other people fall around her." And with that, filming stopped. That single moment summed her up. She believed Hyacinth's comedy didn't come from cheap laughs or pratfalls. It came from her unwavering belief that she was better than everyone else, even when she clearly wasn't. So if a scene turned her into a clown, Patricia would quietly shut it down. When the episode aired, it was perfect. The audience never saw a fall. They saw pride, and that's why her performance endures. That instinct made her unforgettable. Fact 9. The telephone that exposed Hyacinth's biggest lie. If there was one thing Hyacinth loved more than tea and titles, it was that perfect white slimline telephone. She'd snatch it up with that glorious greeting. The bouquet residence, the lady of the house speaking. Elegant, controlled, superior. Except there's one delicious twist. That phone was her biggest humiliation, biggest. In the world of the show, her number was nearly identical to a local Chinese takeaway. So every time it rang, the lady of the house ended up shouting at strangers asking for sweet and sour pork. The writers slipped this in intentionally. What made it genius is how she never learned. Episode after episode, she'd scold those ignorant people, demanding the restaurant change their number, refusing to change hers. That phone became a metaphor for her entire existence. She wanted sophistication, but her connection to the real world kept interrupting. Literally. Fact 10. The lazy man who once was a beetle. If someone told you that Onslow, the beer-bellied king of laziness, was once the voice of a beetle, you'd probably laugh. But it's true. Long before Geoffrey Hughes ever sat on that worn-out sofa, he was lending his voice to Paul McCartney in the 1968 animated classic Yellow Submarine. Back then, the Beatles were too busy to record their own dialogue. Producers searched for actors who could capture each member's spirit. Hughes was picked because his voice carried warmth and humor, and it later made Onslow lovable. He embodied his friendliness, his easy rhythm of speech. Fast forward 20 years, and the same man who gave life to a global icon ended up playing Britain's laziest husband. The contrast couldn't be starker, from psychedelic submarines to dirty vests and broken cars. And yet, it worked. Hughes's voice carried that same natural rhythm, that effortless comic timing. It's one of those small British television secrets that sounds too strange to be real. But it's true. The soul of Yellow Submarine and the heart of Keeping Up Appearances were voiced by the same man. Fact 11. The car that exposed Hyacinth's blindness. Hyacinth loved her husband's car like it was proof of nobility. That 1987 Rover 216 was, in her mind, a chariot of class distinction. She bragged about it endlessly, using it to look down on everyone around her, especially poor Elizabeth next door. "You know, dear, Richard's car is quite superior," she'd say, chin high, nose higher. But here's the twist. Elizabeth's car was newer. Her humble 1989 Austin Metro had rolled off the assembly line 2 years after Hyacinth's beloved Rover. While Hyacinth lectured her about refinement, she was literally worshipping an older model. This detail wasn't random. The writers slipped it in deliberately to show how deeply Hyacinth lived in illusion. Her need to feel superior blinded her from the truth sitting right in front of her driveway. She didn't want facts. She wanted fantasy. It's the perfect symbol of her world. Everything polished, everything above average, but nothing grounded in reality. And like most things Hyacinth touched, it was powered entirely by delusion. Fact 12. When Hyacinth became a psychological syndrome. What began as comedy ended up in psychology textbooks. During the 2008 financial crisis, British researchers coined a real term, Hyacinth bucket syndrome. It described middle-class families who kept spending money they didn't have, pretending everything was fine. Sound familiar? The idea was simple but brutal. People couldn't accept losing status, so they clung to appearances, designer clothes on credit cards, dinner parties they couldn't afford, fake smiles masking debt. It was Hyacinth's entire personality transplanted into real life. Sociologists loved the comparison. They said Hyacinth represented status anxiety, the fear of slipping down the social ladder. The show had mocked it. Real life made it tragic. Families were bankrupting themselves to protect reputations that didn't exist. Even years after the final episode, her obsession with class and perfection kept echoing through real human behavior. Fact 13. The episodes that secretly had no names. Here's a twist that even die-hard fans miss. When Keeping Up Appearances first aired in the 90s, not a single episode had a title. Nothing. They went out blank. Viewers didn't know they were watching The Fancy Dress Ball or Driving Mrs. Fortescue. Those names didn't exist yet. Back then, the BBC simply labeled them by number. Series 2, Episode 3. And that was it. The audience learned to describe episodes by memory. The one where Hyacinth falls into the river. The one with the royal visit. The one with that disastrous barbecue. Fans traded tapes, scribbling nicknames on VHS boxes, creating their own unofficial titles. Years later, when the BBC released the series on DVD, executives realized it felt odd to sell Episode 3, so they invented titles retroactively. Every name people use today was made up long after filming ended. It's funny, isn't it? The most organized woman on television came from a show that didn't even label its own episodes properly. Fact 14. The secret behind Hyacinth's terrible singing. Remember the sound of Hyacinth singing at poor Emmett's door? Those high-pitched warbles that could make flowers wilt? Well, here's the shocker. Patricia Routledge, the actress who played her, is actually one of Britain's finest classical singers. A real mezzo-soprano, trained in opera and a Tony Award winner. Yes, the woman who tortured her neighbors with Ave Maria could perform it beautifully in real life. She'd spent decades on stage before television, starring in musicals and Gilbert and Sullivan operettas. When she joined Keeping Up Appearances, she asked the director if Hyacinth should sing badly or beautifully. They said, "Make it dreadful." So she deliberately untrained her voice, all while keeping a straight face. Singing badly on purpose is harder than people think. It takes control to sound out of control. The result was iconic. Comedy built on real talent hiding behind chaos. Fact 15. The mistakes hidden in a perfect world. Hyacinth Bucket believed in perfection. Her house was spotless, her garden immaculate, her manners rehearsed down to the syllable. But behind the camera? The show was full of hilarious continuity disasters. Fans who freeze-frame episodes have caught everything from missing cars to teleporting furniture. In one scene, Hyacinth and Elizabeth nearly crash into another vehicle on the way to church. Look behind them. There are 2 cars parked in a driveway. Cut to the next shot, and suddenly one's disappeared, replaced by a completely different model. Another time, Richard's Rover magically moves itself between shots, parking badly then perfectly without anyone touching the wheel. Even the sets weren't consistent. Daisy's front hallway changes shape between episodes, doors vanish, furniture swaps sides, yet somehow, no one cared. The audience was too busy laughing. Those tiny cracks made the show even more charming. Proof that under all the Keeping Up Appearances, chaos still reigned. Now you know the truth behind Britain's poshest snob. Which fact made your jaw drop? Comment below, hit like, and subscribe, because the next secret might make Hyacinth faint.